It's time for business news again with Kate Moody, welcoming you to the set here this evening. A diplomatic spat has really come to a head today as Japan has formally downgraded South Korea's trading status. Kate, can we expect to see some real concrete consequences here?
We absolutely can. This has been brewing for the last few months, really, and we've started to see some effects already. Both these countries are powerhouses in the region and in the global economy. Analysts say that Korean businesses have more to lose because they're more dependent on Japanese companies than vice versa. International supply chains, especially for electronic devices, could also be affected. Wasim Cornet has the details.
An angry crowd in the heart of Seoul. These business owners are protesting against Japan's decision to remove South Korea from a so-called white list of favored trade partners. Demonstrators took part in the symbolic trashing of Japanese products they are now asking fellow South Koreans to boycott.
Removing our country from its white list means that Japan has declared an economic war against our country. So we, the small and medium-sized business owners and supermarkets, will expand our movement to boycott the distribution and purchase of Japanese goods even further.
Japanese companies are allowed to fast-track customs procedures when exporting products to countries on the list. Now, South Korean companies like Samsung and LG are having to look for new suppliers in order to reduce their dependence on Japanese electronic components. Earlier this month, South Korea's government pledged $30 billion in financial aid to help its main tech companies. But the damage for South Korean businesses could be severe. Companies are already dealing with side effects from the trade war between China and the U.S. Some Japanese businesses are also vulnerable to a South Korean boycott. Major breweries have seen almost a 50% drop in sales to South Korea. Last month, the island nation recorded a 7.6% drop in South Korean visitors, who made up a quarter of Japan's tourists last year. The decline could spell bad news as Japan gets ready to become the center of the sporting world with the Summer Olympics next year.
Well, another international trade dispute also rumbles on. The U.S. Trade Representative's office has confirmed that a higher tariff rate will be imposed on $300 billion worth of Chinese imports within the coming days. A targeted group of products will see a 15% tariff rather than the 10% originally planned. That'll be starting this Sunday, September the 1st. Still more items, including cell phones and laptops, will be affected in December. Donald Trump made the announcement last week on Twitter in response to Beijing's latest tariffs on $75 billion worth of American goods, including crude oil. Those will also kick in at the beginning of September. The U.S. president has said the two sides are planning to resume negotiations, but no timetable has yet been published. Well, Wall Street largely shrugged off that news despite the threat of escalating tensions there. The energy sector is leading gains as oil prices rise. On news that U.S. inventories dropped more than expected. The Dow Jones up about 250 points, nearly 1%, as we near the end of the trading day. We saw a mixed close for the major European markets, the FTSE 100 rising as the British pound weakened. The DAX and CAC 40 down about a third of a percentage point each. Stocks were flat in Milan, but we'll be watching investors' reaction on Thursday morning after the haggling over Italy's next coalition government appears to have come to an end. Well, the pound sterling has fallen as much as 1% this Wednesday as British Prime Minister Boris Johnson pushed ahead with his plan to suspend Parliament. Currency markets, of course, extremely volatile. They respond to any suggestion that a no-deal Brexit is more likely. That's seen as the worst-case scenario for investors. You can see the pound down about 0.6% against the US dollar, half a percentage point against the euro this hour. Deutsche Bank now says that there is a 50-50 chance that the UK will crash out of the EU without a deal. Ireland's Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister declined to talk about those odds, but speaking to France 24, he insisted that a withdrawal deal would make Brexit smoother on all sides.
It's hard to tell, and it's hard to tell how the British political system will respond to that, and really that's a matter for Parliament. And I've always been careful not to get involved in the parliamentary business of Westminster. You know, they have a sovereign parliament. They have to make difficult decisions and choices. My focus is on protecting the country that I come from, protecting the British-Irish relationship, protecting Ireland's place in the EU and its single market and customs union, and most importantly now, trying to protect a peace agreement that's 21 years old.
Simon Coveney was speaking to France 24 there at the French business forum Medef, which has begun its annual meeting here in Paris. The heads of France's biggest companies are weighing in on the global economy and the changes taking place here in France. Top of the agenda is the government's efforts to reform the pension system, a touchy issue in the French labour market, and one that Emmanuel Macron has vowed to push forward in the coming weeks. Our business editor Stephen Carroll reports.
For the business community, these changes to the pension system are a no-brainer. The company bosses that I've been speaking to say it's simply essential that these changes are made to keep the system funded into the future. Medef supports the introduction of this equilibrium retirement age at 64, up from the current 62, at which people would receive their full pension. The message from the organisation today is that the government should be very clear that people will have to work longer to receive their pension.
We have to prepare for the contraction of our economy. How? By increasing the speed of reforms. That's why the pension reform is important. It's France's #1 public spending, and we have the highest tax rates in the developed world. So we have to increase the speed of reforms.
The mood here at the Medef conference is pretty optimistic. Private sector hiring figures have been strong so far this year in France, and company bosses seem inclined to keep hiring, at least for the rest of 2019. Those dark clouds over the global economy, warnings of recessions from other countries, aren't concerning business leaders here too much, at least for now, although there has been plenty of discussion here of both the US-China trade war and, of course, of Brexit.
Well, French businesses as a whole have had a bit of a rough ride in 2019 amid the Yellow Vest protest movement, especially. But it does look like Paris's tourism industry is coming out relatively unscathed. The French Tourism Board has released its numbers for the first half of the year. While there was a dip in foreign visitors to Paris at the height of the Yellow Vest movement, it was made up for by an uptick in French visitors. Solange Mougin reports.
The beauty of a boat ride down the Seine. So far this year, even during the Yellow Vest movement, tourists have been as enamored as ever by Paris.
It's a romantic city, country in the world.
A lot of history, and so you get a lot of stories different from where we come from.
More than 10 million people made the trip to the Louvre last year, and its popularity is showing no signs of ebbing. So the museum, which is the most visited in the world, is now considering making reservations mandatory. The Tourism Board for the Paris region said that even with the Yellow Vest movement, their first semester numbers remain steady. The half-point drop in foreign tourists was nearly made up by French visitors. Over 17 million hotel rooms were booked, meeting last year's records, and bringing in nearly 10 billion euros from January to June. But for some hotels along the Champs-Élysées, there was a weekend dip earlier this year because of the Saturday protests.
Starting Friday, the hotel would empty out and begin to refill on Mondays.
Some neighborhoods and museums, though, actually felt an uptick because of the Yellow Vest movement.
Museums in the Champs-Élysées area suffered, but the ones farther out essentially picked up those tourists who couldn't visit the central areas. So Montmartre did, at a certain period, benefit from the Yellow Vest movement.
Among foreigners, Americans still hold the top spot for the number of tourists visiting the City of Light, followed by British and Spanish visitors.
There you go. And you look at that skyline and you understand why everyone always wants to come here, don't you?
Sometimes. Kate Moody, thank you so much for that business update, and thank you for watching. Do stay tuned.